It's out of focus. Non?
Comme ça?
T'as regardé là? Hop, je marche là-dessus. Non, non, c'est pas ça, c'est pas la caméra. Bon, on n'y peut rien. Okay, any questions? Final questions? Our friends online, I think you can use the chat today to ask questions. I've made some changes. Okay, Luciana. Is there anything else I can do to honor what I found I am, apart from listening to satsangs, reading the texts and celebrating life? That's already a full program. I think celebrating life is the most important thing. The rest, listening to satsang and reading the text at some point will lose its appeal. But enjoying the company of like-minded friends, living in beauty, my teacher used to say. In other words, paying attention to the music you listen to the books you read, to the friends you hang out with, to the surroundings you live in. For instance, when I visit with close disciples of my teacher, some of them were very wealthy and some were poor. But when I was in their house or in their tiny apartment, I've always felt at home because of the beauty and the simplicity of the way they decorate their houses or the way they lived, the food they ate, etc. So it is to express truth, love and beauty in the realm of manifestation, and there are an infinity of ways in which we can express that. And then we, in turn, so that's the way to celebrate. To celebrate doesn't mean to dance stupidly like they do in French in the weddings. You know, first they get drunk, and then they make a kind of a train. They call it the chenille, the caterpillar, and they go there, blum, 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 in the sound of the music. I mean, I always find that the most boring thing, never go to weddings, I don't go to weddings. I don't do weddings. But I think of my poor Indian friends who they have 5-day weddings. After 1 hour, I'm bored. You see, so this concept of celebration is not what I mean by celebrating life. It's celebrating beauty, truth, love. That's what it is, celebrating life. And following your enthusiasm and following your... And also, something important, learning, discovering. We remain a student of life for life. In other words, life never ended up until it ends. So it's important to keep discovering. And each stage of life has its own beauty, its own charm, its own... so we have to drink the full glass of this celebration. Never stop discovering, never stop. At some point, it's just that misery has been left behind, but it doesn't mean we stop walking on this path. Peter, what do you mean when we say the mind? Consciousness can be experienced. Thoughts can be experienced, but not the mind. The mind is to be something conceptual that we derive or infer from our experience with thoughts. I agree with you. The mind is conceptual. We don't really experience the mind. We experience perceptions. We experience thoughts, in fact, bodily sensations, and sense perceptions. Now, since we experience all of those, so to speak, in the same place, which is consciousness, I give in my book, I baptize mind this limited experience, the limited human experience. So mind is really human experience. What we as human experience phenomenally. So mind is phenomenal human experience. And phenomenal human experience is limited. That which experiences phenomenal human experience is consciousness. The reality that experiences that. But I agree with you, yes, it's a concept because in fact we experience thoughts, bodily sensations, sense perceptions, that we can use a generic term for those mentations. It's a term I coined a long time ago. Mentations would be either a thought, a bodily sensation, or a sense perception. But we never experience a mind. That's true. Mind is a concept. And we experience consciousness directly. Consciousness is neither a concept nor a sense perception nor a bodily sensation. It's a different kind of experience. Numb. Who understands is always consciousness. But mind works hard to understand too. Yes, mind is like the cook who prepares the meal. Consciousness is the one who eats it. so it goes on, I know when my mind works very hard to understand on a feeling level as sensations and heats appear in me. Does consciousness use hard-working mind as a tool to understand something? As we just said before, there is no mind. In terms of understanding, there are thoughts. And the thinking process is in fact a clarifying process of the mind. The clarity in the mind about our true nature has been veiled and obstructed by all kinds of constructs that were built by ignorance. And at some point, so it's like a huge building, and at some point there is a leak in the roof of that building. And the rain, especially if it's in Shropshire, gradually will erode and destroy the building. It takes centuries, right? But it will eventually. So in the same way, it starts with a small leak in this construction of ignorance in the mind. And the construction seems to be very mighty, very strong, very powerful. But this little leak in the roof, through which the rain of truth can pour, eventually will bring down this huge building. This deconstruction or destruction of the patterns of ignorance in the mind is experienced as effort because the building is strong and resists. So what we experience as effort is only the resistance, the strength of the building. As time goes, this resistance diminishes as the destruction process continues, keeps going on. And the resistance diminish greatly after a while. So, consciousness doesn't use the mind really hard working. The mind that is just a tool, this tool was used by ignorance as the slave of ignorance to build the building. So the same tool is used to deconstruct it as a servant of truth. That's it here for the question online. No questions on the chat. Yes.
Hey, Francis. Oh.
No, I don't get the questions. It's weird. Because Mary, you should send the question. Oh, there is no the possibility to send it to all. Huh. Perhaps I should have restarted the meeting. So next time it will be possible. And then, Mary, send me an email too. Better for your question. Yes.
Francis, for a while now, I've really wondered why it is that I feel kind of free in meditation, like sitting with my eyes closed, and kind of relatively challenged in relationships. And it seems like the process is just a kind of, just really slow kind of permeation, and specifically of the bodily sensations that kind of relax when I'm with other people. I'm just wondering, is there anything I can do to kind of assist the process, or is it just to, yeah?
Yes, the precondition for being comfortable in the presence of others is to be comfortable on your own. So meditation achieves that first step, which is important. So it's already a great achievement if you are comfortable on your own, if you can feel free and relaxed. Because then this freedom and relaxation, once you get used to it, you will discover that others don't prevent you from experiencing the same freedom. It is especially easy with like-minded others. You see, because they don't judge you, they don't push your buttons, in principle. In principle. And so it's a process. But you can practice with your chair, pretending it's someone, and so you feel the expansion of your body, and with your tactile body you hug the chair. So if you practice that, then you will do it when you are in the presence of people.
It seems like one of the ways I can kind of sabotage that is by kind of getting involved in a mental effort to try to. It doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's really the cessation of that helps.
It's like the guy who wants to seduce the girl and has a full plan to do that. It never works. He ends up saying a really stupid thing, and instead the stupid guy who is just gets the prize, unless the girl is smart.
Francis, I'm interested in exploring a little lightly resistance without going down the rabbit hole. And how it's showing itself is earlier in the retreat, you, probably in the first week actually, you spoke of the only sleeping 4 or 5 hours, and then having a period of exploring or whatever. And that was a revelation to me, because I had been calling my sleeping for 4 or 5 hours for the last 20 years insomnia. So I was very excited by, just looking so differently. And then I had many days in the early morning of coming awake and then just being, rather than the voice coming in going, you have to get more sleep, when all that comes with that. And it was wonderful. And it just felt like much was being given. How my, sort of view of myself was different. The dreams before waking were really different. And then this morning, when I, started to come up in consciousness, it was a feeling of thickness, density. I was surprised and just tried to just be there. And yet the thickness stayed, the density stayed. And I thought, okay, so now I guess perhaps it's maybe a type of resistance. I was reluctant to label it that, But the conversation seems to be here today, and I'm wondering about it without getting my fingers all over the tar baby.
What's the connection with the sleep? Does this density feel like a lack of sleep?
Does the which
The
feel?
density feel like a lack of sleep?
No. It felt more like the like suppression, like the sense of being squeezed and of the curtains being closed. Kind of a thickness, a heaviness that didn't seem.
But what's the connection between that and the sleep?
I don't know that there is a
Because
connection.
you start your question
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, but
So you imply some kind of connection which I
Okay.
don't understand.
well, what I had previously thought of sleeping only 4 or 5 hours as insufficient and a problem.
Yeah.
In the teaching, when you spoke of that a whole other way, sleeping 4 or 5 hours is kind of what happens, and then there's this room. You don't get up, but you stay prone and quiet, and just be there in rather than.
Not necessarily. I mean, what you may do also, if after 5 hours you are awake, you sit but don't go into agitation. But you sit and meditate or do some yoga. But then you may discover that at some point the sleep attracts you again, and then you go back to sleep in that case.
Yeah.
You see, so then you'll be very refreshed in the morning.
Yeah.
And my teacher, as I said, didn't sleep much during the night. But then when I was driving, as I said also,
Yeah.
So the theory I have about that is the sleep curve theory. It's like that, like it goes like that. On the x-axis you have time, and the y-axis you have the depth of the sleep. And so the curve is like that. It's like a first, then it goes down, and then it has a second bounce, but not as high as the first mountain. So the first mountain goes down, the second mountain, and then down. That's the depth of the sleep. So remember, there is a kind of a pass between the two mountains, right? So then we can represent with an horizontal line the threshold of wakefulness. Now, the higher the threshold of wakefulness, the less you are going to sleep. So there are all the options. If the threshold of wakefulness is low, is here, then the line of sleep does that on top of it. So meaning you sleep during the entire duration. Now, if that threshold of wakefulness goes higher, then you have the first mountain, then it cuts here. At this point, you wake up.
Yeah.
It goes down. It goes back up. At this point, you fall asleep again.
Yeah.
Down, and then you wake up. You see?
Yeah.
If the threshold is even higher, for whatever reason, then you have this first mountain, so you sleep from here to here, but then it goes down, and then it goes up, so you never go back to sleep. Perhaps you feel a little sleepy, but not in a significant way. This is affected also by the level of physical activity. So all of these elements. So I think the bottom line is that we have to follow our body. Our body is the one who dictates when we have to sleep, when we have to wake, whether we have to go back to sleep or not, etc. It's very, as we meditate, we become more and more awake throughout the three phases, waking, the three states: waking state, deep dream state, and deep sleep state. So, since we are more taking our stand as a witness of the states, we detect more easily these demands of the body and of the mind, so to speak. So we can feel, for instance, when we let's say we are in this configuration when we wake up after 4 or 5 hours or 3 hours, and then it goes down, and then the desire to sleep comes back. We detect it very early on because we see that the nature of the thought changes, because we are aware. So we are aware, it's not like we fall asleep, boom, but we are aware of this transition into the dream state. So then then what I do, I lay down again, and also this second part of the night can be very much as a state which is neither sleep nor waking, because it can be a state in which you're still aware of the sense perceptions around you, which I guess on a medical book would not qualify as sleep, if you are aware of the sound, etc. But it is nevertheless a deep state in that sense that if you had a big sound or something like that, or something, you would feel, you would pull like when someone wakes you up from deep sleep. You see, you know this impression when the alarm clock rings in the morning. It's like someone who is deep in the water and has to come very, very quickly to the surface. So also in this type of half sleep, you are aware of the sounds around you. You are nevertheless in some sleep-like state. In fact, it's a meditative state. It's wide in India. They call that yoga nidra. That's the sleep of the yogins. And so in this state, the body gets its full rest. But because the mind doesn't have too many issues to deal with, the mind doesn't need to sleep. The body needs to sleep, the mind doesn't. So it's a kind of that's my interpretation of it. It's a kind of but if you don't do that, the body doesn't get its full requirement. And as I said, the requirement of the body depends on many factors, and the amount of exercise or physical activity is one of the factors.
Yeah. And in being here, I discovered this new distinction of sleeping during meditation. Before, I used to always fight to be a good meditator, and in here, if the sleep seems to have been maybe too short, then I just find myself, boom, and then when I wake up. It's soft and present and beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
So I thought, there's nothing wrong with this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Since we're on the subject
I mean, can you imagine, you're lucky you said that I'm not a Zen teacher.
Over the years, one of the things I've noticed is that there seems to be very little difference between dream activity and what I would call the background mind thinking activity. And in going to sleep and waking up, you kind of see them merge together. And I was just wondering if that's your experience as well.
But also, the bodily sensations is not just the thoughts. You can feel the bodily sensations kind of metamorphose into the element of a dream.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'll have to watch for that, because my dreams have a more, they're kind of like watching a movie without a body connected.
When we fall asleep, it's a very interesting moment to meditate. And in this meditation, if already during the meditation, during the day, you may have observed at some point that the mix between thoughts, external sense perceptions, and bodily sensations changes. You may not have noticed that, but in my case, over the years, the amount of thoughts becomes very minimal during the meditation. And with the eyes closed, the sense perceptions are also minimal, because all you have is sounds, basically. So then it's mostly bodily sensations and emptiness. So before going off to sleep, it's the same. If you meditate at that moment, it's mostly bodily sensations, very little thoughts, and then they morph into, they kind of vanish into silence, and then out of this silence, the elements of the dream emerge. It's interesting to witness this transition, at least once, because then you can see that you are really the reality of both states. You are the reality of both states.
Thank you.
Francis, I want to be reminded about how to see very clearly the oneness when there is very clear inequality at the physical level. And I'll tell you what has triggered this question. On my recent trip to India, there was one morning I went shopping, and of course the dollar takes you further there, so I kind of went a little overboard. Bought clothes maybe I didn't need, but anyway, bought them. And I was driving back to my friend's house on an Uber, in an Uber car, and we had stopped at a light. And I was just looking through the things I had bought, and there was a beggar knocking on my window, on the car window, which happens a lot in India, when you're stopped at a light. And that moment, this whole, there was a grip of the sense of separation. No matter how much I couldn't rationalize how there is oneness there. It was just, I felt it was very, like the inequality of the wealth, or even at the physical level, how comfortable I was sitting in this car, and it was just really it was very difficult for me to see oneness in that situation, and I know there is oneness, but I just couldn't see it. So can you please give me some pointers?
So what did you do?
Well, I was gonna give him some money, but the light turned green and the car drove away. So
That's it. Who is feeling guilty?
Yeah. I was feeling guilty because I was clearly identified as someone that was better off.
Then you may have told the cab driver, stop, let's go back to this guy and let's give him some money. I mean, that's the thing. Instead of feeling guilty, perhaps that's what the situation requires. It happens to me in Paris, the land of socialism, with all those beggars miserable people in the street. So I walk past one guy, and then 50 feet later, I turn around and I give. Sometimes I stop right away. Sometimes I don't give. Sometimes I turn around and I give. And sometimes I give to people who don't even ask. And sometimes I don't give to people who ask. And am I wrong? Am I right? I don't know. I just follow my instinct in the moment.
How is there oneness? How do you see oneness there? That it's just one consciousness.
What's the difference between this wealth inequality and the health inequality? What's the difference?
No, there's no difference. It's like it comes down to inequality.
And what's the difference there between some people are kind of naturally happy, and some people are, and that's the biggest of all inequality, is the happiness inequality. It's not the wealth or health inequality, that's the happiness inequality. As I often said, I was raised, in conditions that would make the so-called ghetto in America look very luxurious. When I was driving in Oakland, in the ghetto in Oakland, all these big houses, old, with big lawns in front. The lawns were not maintained, and there were all kinds of papers and Coke cans on it, and these big Cadillacs, parked in front. I mean, I thought, oh, okay, if that's poverty, these guys they don't know anything about poverty. You see, so the real misery is not necessarily a question of money. That's very important. Spiritual misery is. I'm not saying that that's not the case in India and in other parts of the world. The first peace, for instance, civil peace, the fact that people don't get killed, in a civil war or in a war. I think if we talk about practical matters, should be the first goal. And then food, that people can eat. But if there is food and shelter, then we go into more tricky areas, because there are people who live with very little money and are very happy especially if they don't have to work. And there are lawyers in New York who make a lot of money and are miserable because they work 14 hours a day and on weekends. So, to think always in terms of money and material stuff. In France, there are professional beggars. That's what they do for a living. That's their job.
Not just there.
You know, they are just there. There is, and sometimes they give a service. There is this, in my hometown, there is this parking lot downtown, and it's a paying thing. So when you go back to the parking, there was a place where you put the coins, and you could only put coins with your ticket to get your exit thing. And there was always a guy there from Romania, usually, always from Romania. And the guy was providing a service because he was offering change, you see? So that was a job, you know, so you would give him, you know, you needed, so you would give him. But then they would fight among each other because it was a turf situation. There are little jobs like that in the begging industry.
No, I like what you said about happiness and equality. That's resonating.
And there are children that are raised to beg and to steal also, as pickpockets. There are professional pickpockets. In Paris we have a lot of those, usually from Romania also. It's a fact. And the police, they know that very well. They cannot arrest them, they are minors. And, well, you know, and we could look at that with a judging, moral eye, but in fact, if you place yourself in the condition of these children, you understand, and even of the parents, that's all they know how to make a living. You know, these are old professions that have always existed in the world. Like prostitution is, in France we call it the oldest profession in the world. So we look at all of that with our, you know, judging Western moral eye. At some point, regarding inequalities, that's an interesting thing. When inequality becomes, there is a moment when envy becomes the motive to get rid of inequalities. I want to be as wealthy as Trump, you know, and if I cannot be as wealthy as Trump, then I want him to be as poor as me. You see? And there is this thing, I think a threshold gets crossed when I'd rather be poor in an economy where everybody is poor than be wealthier in an economy in which people are wealthier than me. I'd rather be poor in an economy where everybody is poor than more prosperous in an economy where people are more prosperous than me. So then this type of judgment is not based on fact, but on psychological envy. You are following me, right? For obvious reasons, because I'd rather be poorer and everybody be poor the same than more prosperous, but have people more prosperous than me. So it's obviously not driven by the economic realities, right? But by envy. But envy comes from ignorance. So the question is, should we condone this attitude? If you are in the truth, certainly not. Envy should never be rewarded. You see, because then you could condone anything then that comes from ignorance. On the other hand, if you have a friend, if you have a stranger who needs assistance, you give assistance. It's compassion. And if you are one whose vocation is to give assistance because you enjoy doing that, you enjoy taking care of people who are in need, by all means you should do that, You should follow your good heart. That's why I asked, why didn't you give money to the guy? Because you were touched. When we are touched, we have to go for it. But at the same time, we have to be aware of what the reality behind that is, what the reality, what the real reasons, what the circumstances are. We cannot have we cannot be predictable in what we do, what we decide in given circumstances. We have to follow our heart, that's all.
So actually what is interesting, Francis, is that in India you see beggars everywhere, and I don't give to everyone that's asking, but I noticed that what was triggering even more in that situation was because I had just purchased something, and so I felt like, of course I don't know how I would have responded if I hadn't actually shopped just before I met this beggar, So there was this, I purchased all this. So there was even more this urge to, I think, like even more of a guilt to not share. So that was interesting.
There is a dilemma. It's a very interesting question. What am I responsible for as a servant of the Absolute? And what is the Absolute responsible for in the state of the affairs in the world? You see? And if we feel that we are responsible for everything, we don't act any longer as a servant of the Absolute. You are following me? We pretend to be the Absolute, or we say, or we stand in judgment of the Absolute and tell the Absolute, up yours, God, your world is not good, I know better than you. You see? And whereas if you are the servant of the Absolute, it's a different story, because then you follow your heart in the situation, and you don't know what your heart is going to tell you. You don't come from concept, from the preconceived idea that you are going to save the world. But to do your best, even if ultimately it's going to be a failure. You see, because you are not attached to the outcome of the deed. You do the deed because it comes from you. And it should make you feel good when you do the deed, whatever that is. That's what I said often, that, for instance, Mozart, in composing his music, helped mankind much more than Hitler in trying to, to implement his notion of a better world in which the German race and the Aryan race would be on top and everybody else would be, it's a kind of caste system, a la the Nazi caste system. So follow your heart, be compassionate, and at the same time, be compassionate in a natural way by following your vocation, whatever this vocation is, but not by feeling guilty. The feeling guilty always comes from ignorance. It's a difficult thing to deal with.
This is a...
The tough questions come on the last day, right?
This is a bit conceptual, but is the reason that Advaita teachings, non-dual teachings, seem to completely deny or avoid the concept of soul, a soul, is that because the concept of soul has become so connected to separateness that to talk about a soul just so brings with it separate individual that it gets in the way of the teaching?
I think the Vedantic approach is an approach of clarity, and I don't mind using the concept of soul, provided I have a clear definition of it. And then when we look into it, we see that there is no clear definition of what soul means. The best definition would be consciousness, in which the answer is simple. Yeah, why not use the concept of soul? But then there is no individual soul. There is only one soul. But usually people would disagree with that. They would say, no, the soul is there are many souls. There are as many souls as human beings, and probably more with the departed ones, right? And then they would say, but however, dogs don't have soul. It used to be even that blacks didn't have souls, right? So that leads to, all this limitation leads to racism and speciesism. And
so that's kind of what I was wondering. So if it gets turned into something that creates separateness or individuals or...
So I don't mind talking about soul if you tell me what soul is.
Well, the experience of what's experiencing the world differently here than what's experiencing the world differently there, but without going to that means separate individuals, just a separate instrument having slightly different impressions.
Well, when you say what is experiencing the world here and what is experiencing the world there,
right?
It's consciousness.
Right.
Only consciousness experiences.
Right. So it's the phenomena being experienced, the quality of the perceptions.
Then the phenomena being experienced is what I call mind.
Right.
And minds are separate. and they seem to be very closely connected to the body. That's why I use the expression body-mind, like two sides of the same coin.
Well, I was wondering that maybe body-mind is... I'm wondering if there's an experience of body-mind presence that's individualized without ever losing its connection with the whole, all of consciousness. So there's this thing, as I understand it, and I don't really know, but it's in philosophy called the first-person givenness, which is this idea that your view, your experience is not the same as my, but this, and I know that that's getting in trouble because consciousness is the experiencer, yet there is this, they call it the first-person givenness, where the details of your experience are different than the details of my experience. And that in there, so the body-mind, I guess you could say the body-mind is having a different, just through sheer location, for instance.
Yes.
But
these are, the body-minds are instruments of perception.
right.
Through which that which perceives.
Yes.
But the fact that these instruments of perceptions are different, and therefore that which is perceived through them is different, doesn't imply that there are two different perceivers or perceiving realities.
Right. True. Yeah, I do get that, but there's is there not then some kind of, I don't know whether quantum is the right analogy to use or something, where there's not an entity, but a perspective, an instrument that's not separate?
I don't deny that there are two instruments, if you will. And even, for instance, let us place, for the sake of the argument, let us consider this question from the strict vantage point of materialism, right? In other words, from the vantage point of materialism, mind is created by the body, right? There is nothing in the mind which is not explained away by the body. Okay, we agree on that. So just in a strict materialist perspective. So we have two perceiving instruments, two bodies, right? And there is nothing else than, now these two perceiving instruments they perceive the universe, right? So, and they are part of the universe, right? They are made of matter like the rest of the universe. So there is only one reality, which is the reality of the universe and the reality of each of these perceiving instruments, right? Now, what is the reality that perceives in this context?
The overarching.
Yeah, it is even in the purely materialistic context, there is only one perceiving reality.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So, yes.
And that which is perceived, and the reality of that which is perceived, the universe, is also the reality that perceives.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And you can translate that. Let's then take another hypothesis. Let's take the idealist hypothesis. In the idealist hypothesis, there is no external physical reality. There are only minds, right? There are only minds. Only minds. So the world doesn't exist. All there is are perceptions in mind. Now, either in this idealist perspective, you are open to the possibility that there is real communication between minds, like right now, right? So, in other words, we are everything, there is nothing outside, right? We are pure minds, but nevertheless, we interact. Now, for this interaction between the two minds to be possible, our two minds have to belong to a common reality, right?
Yes.
And therefore, the reality that perceives each of these minds has to be the same. So even in this purely idealist perspective, the reality that perceives is one. That doesn't deny the existence of two minds. Actually, we cannot make the determination between the materialist hypothesis and the idealist hypothesis. We cannot make the determination based on solely on our phenomenal experience, which one is true, right? But in both cases, it doesn't matter, because in both cases, there is only one perceiving reality. Right. You see, so this notion of soul versus matter, for instance, arises only when a dualism arises, a division in reality, and somehow this notion that there are many realities. So that's dualism. But if you are convinced that there is only one reality, for whatever reason we are convinced of that, then you have to come to the conclusion that there is only one consciousness. There is only one perceiving agent. That's very important. Because otherwise we become kind of, most people are kind of schizophrenic. For instance, materialists are schizophrenic because they believe there is only one reality, right? Which is matter. But at the same time, they would enter into fights, and they would fight with the other person as if they were a separate perceiving reality. Right. You see, so they are not materialist up until the very end. At some point, they lose track of their beautiful materialism, and they inadvertently, they become a little bit idealistic or whatever, or religious. You see, if they were materialist up to the very end, then they will be non-dualist. That's very simple. Why? Because if we say everything is matter, without exception, it means everything is one thing. That's non-duality right there. Then whether you call it matter, or God, or consciousness, we are not going to fight over the wording of things, you see?
So once one is clear that consciousness is everything, then allowing for appreciating the instrument. It was like celebrating life. That takes place there, perhaps, and not here, right? So allowing for that without losing, I guess it seems sometimes like it's either all one way or the other. There's just the universal experience, the non-personal experience, with no room for personalness at all, or something more perhaps subtle or quantum-like, I'm not sure, that allows for a little bit of both. So the real reality, the most real, the most profound reality, is the lack of the personal, the impersonal. And there's an allowance for, within that, instruments have different experiences, but that's not denying the universality of the deeper truth.
What is very important is not to see these two levels somehow as two. Okay, you see, in quantum mechanics, if you take what is called the duality wave particle, right, which you are alluding to perhaps, the big difference is that in the duality wave particle, the two poles are equally real and equally unreal. They are on the same level of reality / irreality. You see? Right. Whereas here it's not the case. You know, there is a hierarchy where the truth is, the reality is, there is only one reality. And then there is the dream and there is the multiplicity, I mean the dream, the cosmic dream, right? There is the diversity. So, I'm not denying the diversity, but we have to place it in context and not on an equal footing with the absolute reality. That which enables us to see things with a grain of salt in the world, you see, and basically to act as if it mattered, knowing it doesn't matter. You know, that in our deed, we act as if it mattered for whatever reason that comes from our heart in our intelligence in a given circumstance. We act as if it mattered, knowing it doesn't matter.
Yeah. That, I think, yeah. That definitely the hierarchy without without creating a new duality. It seems to me that in there's a lot of room for happiness.
Yeah. And going back to the compassion and following our heart. First, it's very important to follow our heart, but it is equally important to follow our heart in a direction that pleases our heart. You know, for instance, we had this, in France, this religious guy called l'Abbé Pierre, who was feeding the hungry, you know, and did a great job at that. And we had Mozart composing this beautiful music. So imagine that the Abbé Pierre composes music and that Mozart feeds the hungry. You know, I guess, looking at the way Mozart was handling his family budget, the feeding of the organization of the feeding of the would have been a catastrophe. And I am not sure that the music that would have been composed by l'Abbé Pierre would have been that heavenly. You see, and that's the beauty of it, that there is a place for each of us. Each of us can find their place, their vocation in this world, which is going to add value, add happiness to the world, add harmony, justice, whatever. And at the same time, follow their God-given vocation and enthusiasm. You see, that's very important. Because that's not what is in the atmosphere in the society where we live. We are always in this thing of effort, of we must suffer. You know, it's deeply ingrained in us. We must suffer. You see, we must suffer here so that later we enjoy the benefits. You know, it's like a retirement plan.
Or must do the right thing, whatever that is. Yeah.
It's a protection racket, is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, and I must say that often I am a little aggressive with organized religion, and that which motivates my aggression is to see the corruption at the head of organizations, you know, and also the imposition of belief systems and the conditioning of children into belief systems instead of developing in them intelligence, critical thinking, and the ability later on to find the truth by themselves, you know, instead of an imposed truth. So these are the two main. But on the other hand, we have to acknowledge the usefulness of general principles of behavior that maintains through, in an artificial way, some seeming order in society. You know, so there is a role played by religion in that sense, and when this thing collapses without having been replaced by the natural ethics that comes from understanding of our true nature, or from experience of our global nature, then there is chaos in society. And I'm afraid we are moving a little bit in that direction right now. I'm not sure that all the new non-dualists on YouTube are really going to save the society from this collapse. It's so this moral, like the laws, ultimately. To have laws to keep, maintain society together is important. Socrates was the first one to recognize that lawlessness leads to chaos and misery.
Francis, this is a question, I would say, a question that came at a young age. Is the question that what is it that's really tying me to this one experience? Why am I only? What ties me to the experience generated just by this one form, what this form can see? And now now I see that, well, there really is no limitation ultimately. But then there seems to be, it's like this form is like a signal generator. And the signal generation keeps going on. And that perhaps that's the reason that sort of gives a sense that, you know, there's only this local perceiving, just this local perceiving.
Yes. But it generates signals based on also of the signals itself perceives or senses, through its sensors. So it's part of a chain of perception, but it is not the observer at the end of the chain of perception. It is only one reality, looking at itself through all these eyes, hearing itself through all these ears. Only one reality. You cannot. It's like the leaf on the tree. And misunderstanding its nature as a leaf, whereas it's the tree. You see, we are the tree of life. We are not the leaves on the tree of life. Our reality is the tree. The tree is eternal. The leaves, they come and go with each season. And the consciousness is like the life that flows through the tree. When a leaf dies, the life stops flowing through this leaf. When the leaf dies. But it doesn't mean the end of the life. So we are life itself. And one way to understand that consciousness never experiences death is to ask ourselves the question, what would the experience of death be like for consciousness? Think about it.
Yeah, like you say, it's an event that could never happen, right?
It could never happen, because it would require consciousness to experience death. So, and people see that as a paradox. Well, there is a simple explanation for it. It's simply, what if consciousness cannot die? So it's the simplest of all explanation. And what if consciousness is not in time? That's a very simple explanation for this apparent paradox. Think about it, because it's a paradox which has a solution.
Thank you.
Francis, I had a question about the meditation. Sometimes during meditation, I can sense the space, which is very pleasant and doesn't have any limits. But I guess I'm having trouble with trying to assess different qualities, like is the space was born, or is it immortal?
Yeah, because at that moment you make an object out of it. Everything that you can contemplate in time, in duration, is not reality. So a space that lasts, a space that elapses, is not reality. Because it would be a dead space. So reality is always instantaneous. That which is real is instantaneous and at the same time eternal. It is eternal in its substance and it is instantaneous in its phenomenal attributes.
So how should I go about verifying these? I suppose I have had glimpses of these.
Conducting experiments, as I said, into the truth of what I say here. Verify for yourself. So in the sense to try to perceive as if the universe were my real body. In fact, it's simply reverting to our direct perception of the universe without the interposition of the false knowledge that I am separate. Already clarify your perception. Clarify how you perceive your body, how you perceive the world. Clarify your thoughts. In other words, every time you think of yourself as a separate consciousness, take a pause and say, okay, the body is separate, fine, the mind is separate, but I am not. And then in your interaction with people and in your relation to events in the world, in your life, have the same attitude in your decision, also in your decisions. That's all. That's all there is to it, conducting experiments, really. Up until your life becomes a constant experiment. So you get used to that. And then there will be a constant outcome if we are in a constant state of experimentation in which we don't even realize we are experimenting because it has become so natural that it's effortless, you see. So then your life becomes also a constant outcome.
Thank you.
I have a few questions here. Mary says, it occurs to me that the idea of something is missing arises out of an old habit of making comparisons. A past situation where something was missing or potential in the future to fill in a sense of lack. I come to the conclusion that in the present moment nothing can possibly be missing, otherwise there would be blank spots in the universe. Does a sense of lack come from making mind-made comparisons? And by abiding in presence, in the present is always complete and full regardless of the conditions? Yes, the second is true. The present is always complete. In other words, in the present moment, there is never ignorance. Ignorance is always in relation to the past and to the future. But it's never actually experienced because that which is real is only in the present moment. So ignorance is always hypothetical. Now, regarding the sense of lack come from making mind-made comparisons, no, I think the sense of lack comes from a belief or a sense of separation in the body. Because we can make comparisons between the past and the future without experiencing a sense of lack. For instance, if we have made a mistake in the past, and a similar situation presents itself in the future, we can use our past experience to have a more appropriate, to face a similar situation in a more appropriate manner. There is not necessarily in this process any sense of lack. For instance, if I play a tennis match and I got beaten at the end because I didn't notice that, in fact, the backhand of my opponent was better than his forehand. And I was always playing his backhand based on the assumption that generally a backhand is weaker than a forehand. Then I got beaten up, okay? And I analyzed why I was beaten, and I discovered that was the reason. So next time I'm playing a match, instead of systematically playing the backhand of my opponent, who is a righty, I will try both. I will try to evaluate. So I have improved my skills based on this past experience and comparison. So there is no ignorance involved in that. On the contrary, there is intelligence involved in this process. So that's why I think that the reason for the sense of, the sense of lack is the belief and the feeling to be separate. Actually, the sense of lack is almost the same thing. All of that, at some point, converge. Ignorance, the sense of me, the sense of lack, sense of separation, all of that converges into something very simple, an I thought and an I feeling that are very closely related, like when you have a sprouting seed, and you have a little thing that goes upward, and the little root that goes downward. So the thought of me would be the thing going upward, and the sense of me would be the little roots, and they both sprout from this seed of ignorance. Yelena, I want to follow up on inequality question, but in a different angle. There is no me and there are no others. I have met a woman yesterday at work who was obviously attached to her misery. I could not feel any compassion. I was looking at her, knowing that she is not a miserable individual she believes herself to be. Then, as I was talking to her, I knew she was lying. The judgment arose. At that point, I was not sure how to feel about her. Do I just watch people like that, like actors in the theater, remembering that they are not what they seem? Well, when someone is lying to you, don't pretend you believe them. Don't tell them you're lying. Use what my teacher in those circumstances would say, "Oh, really?"
Francis, just quickly regarding vocation, I guess it's all about enthusiasm.
What?
It's about enthusiasm, you say often.
Yes.
I have a specific issue, but I don't know if I'm suppressing my enthusiasm for something or if it's a natural kind of falling away. So
normally, some people, they come with a vocation. But there is a general vocation which is most important for all human beings. It's to find the truth of their nature. And because it's much better to be happy without a vocation than a vocation and be miserable. You see, that's the first theorem. The second theorem, once you're happy, why not go for a vocation? But also, if you don't have a vocation, go for hobbies. It's not bad either. You follow your enthusiasm, you see. Sometimes you can retire, meaning you retire happy without a vocation, then you can have hobbies. Okay, we have answered all the questions. No more questions. It was very sweet. as usual. I love you. It's so sweet. So sweet. These beautiful beings gathering here. So sweet. Just beautiful. And thank you all. Thank you again, our organizers, and everybody. Safe trip home.